All
Good
right.
morning, girls.
Morning, everybody. Thank you
Mine
for
takes a break at 25.
um
I have this other book that has like a thing from Deuteronomy 1 to 4. It's kind of an overview of those chapters. There was a little bit of interesting stuff in there. I don't know if anybody wants to hear it or not.
yeah, go ahead. That goes with chapter 1, you're saying?
Yeah, it's chapters 1 through 4.
Okay.
It has it divided off.
Is it chapters 1 through 4 or verses 1 through 4?
Chapters 1 through 4.
Okay.
It says Moses looked back. As Deuteronomy opens and Moses begins his first address to God's people, we see the children of Israel on the border of the land of Canaan, in a place where an 11 days journey some 40 years before could have brought them. Yet it had taken them 40 years. How slowly they covered the ground, what windings and turnings. We marvel at Israel's slowness. We should rather marvel at our own. How often we have to go over the same ground again and again. We, like they, are kept back by our deplorable unbelief. We should be ashamed at the time it takes us to learn our lessons. God, however, is such a faithful teacher. He never lets us pass one to another until we are ready. God never fails us when we put our trust in him, but he cannot do many mighty works because of our unbelief. So it was too with the Israelites. Several hundred years before, God had promised Abraham and his seed it says Hebrew Zerah, offspring descendant, a rich and wondrous land. And they were now standing upon its borders. They finally were ready to enter the land after all the years of anticipation and hope. Closing chapters of Numbers found them camped by the Jordan, waiting to go over into the promised land itself. In Deuteronomy, God put before the children of Israel the conditions for their entering and holding the land. We see all these conditions summed up in one great word: obedience. The children of Israel entered the promised land under the conditions of the law. The book of Deuteronomy is one long plea for hearty obedience to God based on the grand motives of love and fear. And now, Israel, what does the Lord your God ask of you but to fear the Lord your God, to walk in obedience to him, to love him, to serve the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul? Deuteronomy 10:12. In the first 4 books of the how do you say that? Pentateuch, God is choosing Israel. Now he is letting Israel choose him. Besides Moses, only Caleb and Joshua were left from the generation that had come out of Egypt. All the others were dead. The younger generation who now lived had suffered hardships and in the wilderness wanderings and were ready and anxious for the conquest. But Moses must first repeat the law to them. Moses, a grand old man, is now 120 years old. He knows that his work is finished, for God had told him that another will lead the people into Canaan. He begins his farewell address to the people by describing how he had led them these past 40 years. As God had instructed him, he had delivered God's people from the bondage of Egypt, guided them through the many dangers that confronted them, trained them, gave them forms of government, laws, and religious institutions, and molded them into a nation. Moses gives the children of Israel this look back, recalling the history of Israel and reviewing their wanderings. He reminds them of God's faithfulness and urges them to be grateful and obedient. He likens God's care of them to a loving father who cherishes his little ones, fearing they might become lost in the wilderness or become injured by the heat of the sun. He supplied all their needs. They lacked for nothing. The children of Israel were now at the end of their journey in the plain east of the Jordan, overlooking the land they had come so far to possess. It lay before them in the glories of the springtime, but the impassable Jordan River roiled in front of them, and on the other side, walled cities rose up in seemingly impregnable strength. The Israelites were like young graduates leaving high school or college, about to enter their life's work. Moses spoke to his beloved people in the most earnest and eloquent way and appealed to them to serve and obey God. His words still echoed down the corridors of time.
So that was saying that Numbers is a retelling of the desert. Is that what he was saying?
You mean Deuteronomy or you mean Numbers?
Was he saying that Numbers was like a retelling?
I don't know if it's the retelling. Is that where the original story in Numbers?
He said Numbers ends with the end of the journey. Isn't that what you said,
Yeah.
Kathy?
Yeah, that's
Numbers.
their end of their journey.
Okay.
Now they're in Deuteronomy. Now they're getting ready to go into the promised land. But in these first 4 chapters, it sounds to me like Moses is going back and looking over the journey and giving them insight as to what had happened.
You mean taking wisdom from somebody older than yourself?
Yeah.
What a unique idea.
Yeah.
You might have something really worthy to say.
But we'll learn the hard way by ourselves.
Yeah. Stan had said something to me about Deuteronomy being 5 sermons, but we haven't said anything about that so far, have we? Because I told him I don't think that we've read that anywhere yet. So
there was I think that was that one thing that I saw at the beginning of Worsby where it had broke down into 5 sections. And I don't know whether that's what he meant. Because it has
about sections. Yeah, I never understood that. If we go over that again, I need to
the
write
key
it down.
themes.
Yeah, it has the outline. It has it has number 1, remembering God's blessings, and then it's chapter 1 to 5:33. And the second one is responding to God's goodness, chapter 6 to 11. 3 is reviewing God's word, chapter 12:1 to chapter 26:19. 4 is renewing God's covenant, 27:1 to 30:20. And 5 is replacing God's servant, 31 to 34. Now, whether that's what he meant by the 5 sermons, I'm not sure.
Maybe. Sounds like it could be.
I think I even had in my Bible something like that broke down.
Can you take a picture of that?
Yeah, I can.
And send it through the text, please? Thank
Yeah.
you.
All right, so we are to chapter 2, and someone said theirs broke at 25. Mine does also. So do we want to do through 25 and hope we can get through it? If someone would like to volunteer to read. Otherwise, you have to listen to me the whole time.
I'll read.
Thank you.
Deuteronomy chapter 2, remembering. I'm sorry, Kim, did you want to say
I was
something?
going to say, I can read if you want me to. I just had it on mute. So but go ahead if you wish, please.
Remembering Israel's wanderings. Then we turned around and headed back across the wilderness towards the Red Sea, just as the Lord had instructed me. And we wandered around in the region of Mount Seir, S-E-I-R, for a long time. Then at last the Lord said to me, "You have been wandering around in this hill country long enough. Turn to the north. Give these orders to the people. You will pass through the country belonging to your relatives, the Edomites, the descendants of Esau, who live in Seir. The Edomites will feel threatened, so be careful. Do not bother them, for I have given them all the hill country around Mount Seir." Am I saying that right? S-E-I-R?
I think so.
Okay. As their property. And I will not give you even 1 square foot of their land. If you need food to eat or water to drink, pay them for it. For the Lord your God has blessed you in everything you have done. He has watched your every step through this great wilderness during these 40 years. The Lord your God has been with you, and you have lacked nothing. So we bypassed the territory of our relatives, the descendants of Esau, who live in Seir. We avoided the road through the Arbar Valley that comes up from Elath and Eisengerber. Should let you read, Kim. Then, as we turned north along the desert route through Moab, the Lord warned us, do not bother the Moabites, the descendants of Lot, or start a war with them. I have given them Ar as their property and will not give you any of their land.
Interesting that he's covering, so they're all descendants of Abraham, and he's covering all of their nations. That's interesting to me. Sorry, didn't mean to interrupt.
Okay. A race of giants called Emites had once lived in the area of Ar. They were as strong and numerous and tall as the Anakites, the other race of giants. Both the Emites and the Anakites are also known as Rephahites through the Moabites, though the Moabites call them Emites. Did y'all get that?
No.
In earlier times, the Horites had lived in Seir, but they were driven out and displaced by the descendants of Esau, just as Israel drove out the people of Canaan, where the Lord gave Israel their land. Moses continued. Then the Lord said to us, get moving, cross the Zered brook. So we crossed the brook. 38 years passed from the time we left Kadesh Barnea until we finally crossed the Zered brook. By then, all the men old enough to fight in battle had died in the wilderness, as the Lord had vowed would happen. The Lord struck them down until they had all been eliminated from the community. When all the men of fighting age had died, the Lord said to me, today you will cross the border of Moab and Ar and enter the land of the Ammonites, the descendants of Lot. But do not bother them or start a war with them. I have given the land of Ammon to them as their property and will not give you any of their land. That area was once considered the land of the Rephahites who had lived there, though the Anamites called them
Zamzummim.
Zamzumites.
I've never even heard of these things. Anyway.
I mean, good, I haven't either. They were also as strong and numerous and tall as the Anakites, but the Lord destroyed them so the Anamites could occupy their land. He had done the same for the descendants of Esau who lived in Seir, for he destroyed the Horites so they could settle in their place. The descendants of Esau live there to this day. A similar thing happened when the Caporites from Crete invaded and destroyed the Avivites who lived in the villages in the area of Gaza. Moses continued. Then the Lord said, now get moving, cross the Aaron Gorge. Look, I will hand over to you Shihon, the Amorite king of Heshbon, and I will give you this land. Attack them and begin to occupy the land. Beginning today, I will make people throughout the earth terrified of you. When they hear reports about you, they will tremble and dread with fear. That's a lot of people.
Yeah, I think like what I mainly picked up was like he was controlling all of that. Like I will give, I will take away. I will tell you where to go. You cannot have that.
Yeah, don't fuss with those people because I gave them that land.
Yeah. And that he was preparing these people for them to come, because he was saying, I will put the fear and dread in them. All right.
He guided every step of their way.
So this was when they got beat up. Then he told them to head back toward the Red Sea. So they headed back toward the Red Sea, and then they wandered around in the wilderness for 38 years. And then he turned them back towards going back there again once that elder generation had died off, which is interesting that they all died off within 38 years.
Chrissy, I have a question about this whole wilderness thing. I just happened to be watching a movie yesterday. It was called
Well,
something.
first of all, was it financed by the Pentagon? No, just kidding. Go ahead.
I don't think so. But it was called something about the Jesus' last days in the desert or something, where he was in the desert for like 40 days.
Mm-hmm.
So the pictures that they're showing of this desert, it's like all these mountains.
Mm-hmm.
There's no trees or anything. Is it really like that?
Yes.
Okay, it looks like just rocks or sand or something.
Yeah. I know I took some pictures of like the Sahara, not the Sahara, the who are the people between the Gentiles and the Jews? The Samaritan Desert. I know I took pictures of that. I'll see if I can find them today and send them to you.
Okay, I was just
I'll
curious
post
when I
them.
watched that because I thought, I wonder if because it shows like him standing on these high cliffs and he's looking out over and it's just nothing but just looks like mountains of just rock and sand. And I didn't know if that was an actual.
It is. And so when you're out there, you can tell where water is because there will be green around the water. But it will be like if you went to a creek here, there would be the green around the creek, but the rest of it would be desolate.
Okay.
But yes, it looks like that. And actually, it looks like a bunch of sand, but it's rock.
Yeah.
I don't even know how goats eat there, but somehow they survive. Yeah, so if I think of it, here, let me make myself a note. If I think of it, okay, I made myself a note to send Julie something. Where did it go? Oh, heavens. Oh, here it is.
Because it would be no wonder that they had trouble finding food.
Exactly.
Or even water, whatever.
Mhm. Well, in Israel, it is desert, so there's no natural water. Now, I wanted to say, because I did say they didn't have natural water. They had the water coming in the Jordan, but that could be cut off from them. But they are taking the water out of the Sea of Galilee, and they've created this processing thing that does give them fresh water out of that. So they have figured out how to do that. But that would be one of the war tactics, would be to shut the water off to them. And they do have the byway. So like any goods going from the north to the south, you have to go through Israel along the Mediterranean coast. So they have that as bargaining. You know, people have to be able to go from their north border to their south border along the coast to get goods.
I want to ask a question. When the Israelites were moving, they did not take any animals with them? Or was it just
they did, didn't they? Because the Pharaoh had to send them off with, like at the end, he sent them off with a bunch of stuff.
You wonder how they survived.
That's what I mean. Like when you see Bedouins wandering around in the desert, this last time I didn't see them, the time before in 2017, I did see Bedouins. And they're like desert gypsies, and they have camels, and they have goats, and somehow they find food and survive, but I don't know how. But it is true, like if you see, say, like a tree when you're out there, you go underneath that tree, the temperature drops 10 degrees under that tree, just getting out of the sun.
Hmm.
So you feel like you're in air conditioning when you get underneath the tree. I'll look for the pictures and then I'll post them on Facebook and tag you all, and I'll make it a custom group, so you can see them. All right, Cindy, are you ready with John?
I am.
Uh-oh.
Two, 1 to 23. This is the Edomites, Moabites, and Ammonites. 2:1, the way of the Red Sea. After spending a long time at Kadesh, the Israelites set out once again at the command of the Lord through Moses. They traveled away from the Promised Land in a southeasterly direction from Kadesh toward the Gulf of Aqaba on the road to the Red Sea. Thus began the wanderings that were about to end. Skirted Mount Seir. Israel spent many days wandering in the vicinity of Mount Seir. It's a mountain range of Edom, south of the Dead Sea, and extends down through the eastern flank of the Arabah. 2:3, turn northward. The departure from Kadesh had been a southeasterly direction away from the Promised Land until the Lord commanded Israel to turn against northward in the direction of the Promised Land. 2:4, your brethren, the descendants of Esau. Esau was the brother of Jacob. The Edomites, the descendants of Esau, lived in Mount Seir. According to Numbers 20:14 to 21, the Edomites refused to allow Israel to pass through their land. Verse 8, reflecting this refusal, states that the Israelites went around the border of the descendants of Esau, that is, to the east of their territory. 2:5, I will not give you any of their land. God had granted to the descendants of Esau an inheritance. Mount Seir was their possession. In verse 9, the same is said about the Moabites, and in verse 19 about the Ammonites. 2:8, from Elath and Ezion Geber, two towns located just north of the Gulf of Aqaba. Israel passed to the east of Edom and to the east of Moab on their journey northward. 2:10, the Ammon, apparently a Moabite term, meaning terrible ones. These people, numerous and tall, were the pre-Moabite occupants of the land of Moab. 2:12, their possession which the Lord gave them. The Horites were Hurrians, a people who lived in various places in Syria and Palestine. Those living in the region of Seir had been displaced by the descendants of Esau. The displacement of the Horites by the Edomites was analogous to the Israelites' possession of their own land. 2:13, Zered, a brook that ran into the Dead Sea from the southeast. It seems to have constituted the southern boundary of Moab. In contrast to the disobedience associated with Kadesh, the people obeyed the command to cross over the brook Zered. There was a new spirit of obedience toward the Lord among the people. 2:14, 38 years. From 1444 to 1406 BC. These were the years from the failure at Kadesh to the obedience at Zered. It was during this time that the rebellious generation who had been denied access to the Promised Land by the oath of the Lord, they had all died. Sansumamin, apparently an Ammonite term used to describe their precursors in their land. They were characterized as being as tall as the Anakim, but the Lord had destroyed them and given their land to the Ammonites. This was an encouragement to the Israelites. that God could also defeat the Anakim in the land of Canaan and give that land to Israel. 2:23, the Avim. The ancient village dwellers of southwestern Palestine along the Mediterranean coast as far as the city of Gaza.
Hmm.
The Kaftir probably refers to Crete and may be a reference to an early Philistine group from that island who invaded the coast of Palestine, defeated the Avim, and then dwelt there. These Kaftorium were precursors to the later greater Philistine invasion of 1200 BC. And then there's 2:24, the river Arnon, the northern boundary of Moab. Israel was allowed to attack Sihon the Amorite because the Amorites were not relatives of Israel. 2:25, fear of you. As the conquest began, God put the fear of Israel into the hearts of their enemies. And that's it.
Interesting that he says the Heshbon were not relatives of Israel.
Where was that at? The Heshbon.
Like verse 24.
Oh, okay.
Hang on, was it 24? Yeah, it says the northern boundary of Moab. Israel was allowed to attack Sihon the Amorite because the Amorites were not relatives of Israel. I wonder who they were relatives of.
I don't know. That's a good question.
How do we spell it? Amorites. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yeah.
They come from Emer, the fourth son of Canaan. I think that's a good thing to know.
How do you spell that? Emer?
Emer.
Yeah, I was under the understanding that the Lord, it says, my Bible says in 22, the Lord similarly helped the descendants of Esau at Mount Seir when he destroyed the Horites who were living there before them. So I was thinking that was like another time for the wandering, that the Lord destroyed the Horites and then the Amorites came in.
Kim, I'm gonna go down a different back to this is not Cain as in Adam and Eve's Cain. This is Cain as in Ham's son Cain. I don't think we did this story, but Ham laid with his mother, which was his father's wife. She got pregnant. Was that Noah? Yeah, Noah.
Yeah.
And did we go over that? And anyway, Noah cursed Canaan because it was the son produced from that
Okay.
relation.
I don't have all that straight in my head, but yeah, so the Horites came from that.
Well, I'm just saying, like, so this Canaan, this Amorites stem from Emer, which was the fourth son of this Canaan, who was cursed by Noah.
Uh-huh. Okay.
Because he was born out of a relationship between Noah, Noah's wife, and Ham, Noah's son.
Yeah.
And then, I'm sorry, I just wanted to go back to that because I didn't want to lose that. What were you asking, Kim?
Well, So, I mean, and maybe this might be a stupid question.
Never.
The descendants of Esau at Mount Seir. When, or Sire, or however you pronounce it, that's when he destroyed the Horites. So when was that? Relative to
What verse are you in?
22. The Horites then were destroyed before the Ammonites came into the picture.
So let me see who were the race of the Horites. Did it say who the race or the Horites came in at?
The Ammonites lived there in their place.
Up in 12, it says the Horites used to live in Seir, but the descendants of Esau drove them out.
Yeah, when was that? That the
Okay,
Horites-
Hor, are you ready? Abraham's father, okay, so it is said to be the descendant of Hor, who lived around the time, Hor, who lived around the time of Reu, R-E-U. Hor is also said to be a descendant of Hivi, H-I-V-I, son of Canaan, son of Ham. So we are
okay.
back again to the descendants of Ham and Canaan. So that was in 24.
Well,
I think it has to do with Genesis 14:6, Kim.
Wait, where are you at, Kim, again? Am I not-
22, it talks about the descendants of
Oh, the
Esau
Horite, there it is.
destroying the Horites. And then once the Horites were destroyed, then the Ammonites took their place.
Well,
So
this
if
is
there
really a big deal, that one act.
are the Ammonites, who are they descendants of? Abraham?
They were descendants, well, yeah, they would have all, so they were, Amorites were stemmed from Noah's son Ham, who slept with his mother and had a child, Canaan.
Okay, I thought that's what she said, but so why did God show favor to the Amorites and destroy the Horites when they were both descendants of Canaan? That's where I'm confused.
I don't know.
Yeah. And maybe it doesn't matter. Sorry, I don't mean to get us sidetracked.
No, I think it does matter. It's just a matter of us figuring it all out. So Hivi was the son of Canaan. And that would be the Horites. So it says, as he did for the people of Esau who lived in Seir, when he destroyed the Horites before them, and they disposed of them and settled in their place even to this day. We still have all these issues in the Gaza Strip.
Yeah, and I don't understand that genealogy either. I've wanted to, we'll discuss that another day.
All right, did you finish, John? Okay. All right, let's see what Tony says. 2-1. Following the failure at Kadesh, God told the Israelites to turn back and head into the wilderness, where they wandered for the next few decades. It had already been well over a year since they had left Egypt. So from this point, the nation had to spend 38 years wandering around. Moses recalled how they encountered 3 groups of relatives. Oh, here we go. He simplifies it. Moses recalled how they encountered 3 groups of relatives along the way, whom the Lord told them not to pick a fight with: the Edomites, the Moabites, and the Ammonites. There you go. The Edomites, the Moabites, and the Ammonites. The former group descended from forefather Jacob's, or Israel's, twin brother Esau. The latter two, okay, so the first one was the Edomites from Esau. The latter two were related to the patriarch Abraham, since they were descended from his nephew Lot. 2-7. The first people Israel faced were the Edomites, the descendants of the brother of Jacob. God told the Israelites not to provoke them because he had given their land to them as their possession, and if they required any food or water, they were to pay Edom for it. As it turned out, though, the Edomites refused to give Israel anything or even allow them to pass through their land, if you look at Numbers 20, verses 14 through 21. Nevertheless, God had blessed Israel and watched over them. Even though they were a nation of over 2 million people milling around in an immense wilderness, the Lord saw to it that they lacked nothing for 40 years. Through this mention, Moses wanted to instill into the new generation the confidence that just as God had been faithful to their parents, he would also be faithful to them. 8-12. From the land of Edom, Israel traveled to the territory of Moab and received the same command from God not to provoke the Moabites, since they were the descendants of Lot, Abraham's nephew. Previously, a very tall and impressive looking people group lived in Moab, but they had been driven out. Verses 13-15. Moses then recalled God's command to cross the Zered, Z-E-R-E-D, valley in Moab. He reminded his listeners that the entire generation of fighting men had not died in the wilderness from natural causes. Oh. 13-15. They had not died from natural causes. On the contrary, the Lord's hand was against them to eliminate them from camp until they had all perished. This is a solemn reminder that no matter how healthy, wealthy, or powerful you are, you will not succeed if you reject the Lord's will. His hand will be against you. Conversely, if you submit to his kingdom agenda, his hand will be with you to help you in your circumstances. Very interesting. I thought 40 years was a short period of time for an entire generation to die. 16-23. When God's judgment on the older generation had been carried out, Israel was ready to move on in preparation for entering the promised land. Once again, they were to cross the border of Moab, thus bringing them near the territory of the Ammonites. Like his half-brother, Moab, the Ammonite patriarch Ben-Ammah was the son of Lot through his daughter. See Genesis 19:30-38. Israel was not to provoke his descendants either, for God had given them their land. The land of the Ammonites, too, had been previously inhabited by numerous and tall people who had been driven out. This served as a clear message of encouragement to Israel that they could similarly displace the seeming giants that dwelled in the land of Canaan. Well, that's interesting because he was saying, listen, they had tall people, and they had tall people, and they had tall people, and they were defeated because God wanted them to be. So you can defeat these people. My next section goes from 24-30, so I'll stop there. Because don't we stop at 25? Yeah.
Yeah.
How long is Worsby? Can you do it in 5 minutes?
Yeah, probably. Because it stops, it goes to 24, then to 3:11. So I'll stop right at the end of 23.
Okay.
This is a summary of the record given in Numbers 20:14-31:54, describing the people of Israel defeating nations and kings in their march to the promised land. In this speech, Moses gave no details of what Israel experienced while wandering 38 years in the wilderness. I had to check that number. During these years, Israel was out of God's covenant favor, and there is no record that they observed the Passover or even circumcised their sons. After Joshua led the nation across the Jordan River, he took care of those responsibilities, and Israel was back in God's covenant blessing. That's in Joshua 5. The people in Moses' congregation who were 19 years old when the wanderings began were now 57, and certainly would remember those difficult years and tell their children and grandchildren about the time, or about them. Avoiding the Edomites. This is 2:1-8. Moses was commanded by God not to declare war on the people of Edom and try to take their land. The Edomites were descended from Jacob's brother Esau, therefore were related to the Jews. Moses at first tried a friendlier approach, but the Edomites wouldn't accept their brothers on any terms. So Moses led the people by another route that bypassed Mount Seir. The Edomites should have shown Israel brotherly love, but instead they preferred to perpetuate the ancient feud between Jacob and Esau. Centuries later, Edom was still angry with Israel and rejoiced when the Babylonians destroyed Jerusalem. And it has references for Psalms, Ezekiel, Amos, and Obadiah. Of all the problems we face in life, family disagreements are probably the most painful and hardest to solve, and yet the Bible records so many of them. Cain killed his brother Abel in Genesis 4. Jacob and Esau were rivals. Jacob's wives competed with one another in Genesis. Jacob favored Joseph, and therefore Joseph's brothers hated their youngest brother. And David's father-in-law, King Saul, hounded him and tried to kill him. Even in the Christian family, brothers and sisters in the local church don't always love each other. The Corinthian church was divided 4 ways. The Galatian believers were biting and devouring each other. The saints in Ephesus needed to be kind and forgive each other. And in the Philippian church, 2 women were at odds with each other. Family feuds and church disagreements are at least somewhat confined, but when entire nations cultivate and sustain hatred for one another and wage war, many innocent people are hurt. Moses did the right thing.
You mean like Hamas and Israel right now, and how they're using that to divide people? I mean,
Yeah.
that would be a good example.
Mm-hmm. Moses did the right thing by obeying God's command and deliberately avoiding a costly and unprofitable confrontation. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called the children of God. Matthew 5:9. Let us therefore follow after the things which make for peace. Romans 14:19. There are times when avoiding conflict is cowardly, but there are other times when it's a mark of courage and wisdom. And you can find that in James and Matthew. Like James and John, we might feel like calling down fire from heaven on people who reject us, but it's better to follow the examples of Moses and Jesus and take another route. One more factor in this peacemaking should be noticed. God had graciously cared for Israel and blessed his people even during the years of wandering, so there was no need for them to attack their brothers and exploit them. God would give Israel all the land they needed without their having to go to war. If more individuals, families, and nations were content with the blessings God has given them, there would be less fighting among them. Verses 9-23. Avoiding the Moabites and Ammonites. Just as the Edomites were not attacked and conquered because they were related to Jacob, so the Moabites and Ammonites were spared because they were descendants of Lot, the nephew of Abraham. God is supreme over all nations and assigns their territories according to his sovereign will. In fact, the Lord even helped those other nations defeat their enemies and take their land. God is on the throne and deals with the nations according to his perfect will. Neither the Moabites nor the Ammonites deserved this kindness, but the Lord sometimes blesses people because of their relationship to other people. Israel was certainly blessed because of God's covenants with Abraham and David, and the church is blessed today because of the Father's eternal covenant with Jesus Christ. It was a turning point in their history when the Jews crossed the Zered Valley, for now the older generation was gone except for Moses, Caleb, and Joshua. With their time of divine discipline ended, Israel could now look forward to defeating their enemies and moving into the land which the Lord had promised to them. The end.
So he was saying in verse 23, can you go back to that? I think that, so my Bible reads, as for of them who lived in the villages as far as Gaza, the Caphtorim, who came from Caphtor, destroyed them and settled in their place. He was saying they were the relatives of Lot, or no?
Find that.
Confused by those names.
It says the Edomites were not attacked and conquered because they were related to Jacob. So the Moabites and Ammonites were spared because they were descendants of Lot.
Okay, but where are they at? Which group of people are they? Maybe I'll just make a note at the top. Who was descendants of Lot?
Moabites and Ammonites.
Moabites.
There's a reference to Genesis 19:30 to 38 there. I don't know if that
What?
Genesis 19:30 to 38.
My Bible says in verse 18, today Israel shall cross the borders of Moab at Ar into the land of the Ammonites.
Oh, okay, hitting there.
But do not attack them. Okay, so do not attack the
Okay.
Ammonites, for I will not give you any of their land. I have given it to the descendants of Lot. So the Ammonites are the descendants of Lot.
Yes.
Okay. So that's
Both
what
the Moabites and the Ammonites.
I never paid attention to these things before when I read it. That was just like, okay, that group of people. Oh, okay, that group of people. Like I never connected at all mentally. Did that take us through 25, Kathy?
Yeah, I stopped at 24 or 23 because it goes into 24 goes on into the next section then.
All right. So we've completed all the readings through chapter 2, verse 25. We'll pick up tomorrow at verse 20, Tuesday. I won't be here Monday. I have a dentist appointment real early in the morning. So Tuesday we'll pick up at verse 26. This concludes the reading of God's word for today.